Former President Trump has pleaded not guilty to 37 felony counts stemming from his handling of classified documents. Both pro-Trump and anti-Trump protesters gathered outside the Miami courthouse Tuesday. After his arraignment, former President Trump flew to New Jersey to speak to supporters and fundraise. For more on the historical impact of Tuesday's arraignment, let's bring in presidential historian and New York Times bestselling author Alexis Coe. Alexis, your book on George Washington rightly poked fun at the myths of George Washington. So keeping that firmly in mind, he and the fellas were sweating it out 236 years ago at the Constitutional Convention, where they thought about the presidency and the virtue of the office. What was their conception of the presidency with respect to the character of its occupant?
Well, they were looking at the man they intended to set a lot of those precedents. George Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, and they figured out quite a lot in the Constitution, but not everything. Even he, who was, present, wasn't quite sure. I love his copy of the Constitution because he annotated it. He wrote, "President, okay, I'll figure the rest out." For example, the cabinet was his own invention. And they believed that certain precedents that would be set by Washington, who they trusted because he had done something that was truly unprecedented, which was give up power in a time when the world was ruled by monarchs and dictators. They understood that he could control himself, and they thought that people would continue to follow his legacy. And that was true, with certain exceptions. That's why we have term limits and many other things that we might need in the future.
Right. So the character of the occupant would control those ambitions that had sundered other democracies. So what do you think the requirements are now for the job that former President Washington kicked off?
Well, what's interesting is we talked about the Constitution, but I think we should look at Washington's farewell address, which is a strikingly modern document. It's one that I never imagined I would revisit so many times, but I do so many times per week because he almost predicted what was happening. And I'm not saying that the founders were all-knowing people. Thomas Jefferson thought that we should rewrite the Constitution every 19 years. But Washington was very concerned about partisanship. And he was worried that a desire for power and to control the nation would, trump the interests of voters and the principles that we espouse in our Constitution and we hope to bring to the rest of the world. And he was afraid in particular, and these are his words, that unprincipled men would allow themselves to be corrupted in order to maintain power. And I think that's really what's important here. Today, we heard a lot about how Trump is being, wrongly accused and how he's being held out as an example, but we didn't hear some important words like he's innocent.
Right. And sorry, just to pick to get very textual. When you use the word men there, did you mean the singular or that in the sense of party, that it would create this condition where the rallying instinct of the club would essentially trump everything else, to use the word again?
Well, it's so funny. So men he used as a plural. So he said that unprincipled men would try to amass power around someone. And he said it was only a matter of time before a despot would come along and abuse that. And then the American experiment would be over. And we've seen so many moments in which Washington's precedents have been violated, such as the peaceful transfer of power that was never codified because it never needed to be. I think that what you're pointing out is a really significant point here. There were some Republicans, to be fair, today who did say that Trump, had been wrong. And they had in recent days to Mitt Romney said he could have just given back the documents. And as far as I know, the floor, the ground did not open underneath them and they didn't fall into, decay. And so I think that it's important to remember here that we are Americans first, and then whatever political party we decide upon. But that should also be flexible. If we don't like parties, we should be able to leave them. That's what Theodore Roosevelt did. He created his own. Not saying that was a good one, but it's an option.
Yeah, it's an option. So as a last question, Alexis, do you see it? After the last election, when former President Trump lied to stay in office, and it set off a series of challenges inside his Justice Department, inside the Senate, in the individual states, the courts, the system held in the end, but it was tested. Do you see this moment as a kind of round two of that, as the legal process happens, but then you see the political, those factions you were talking about with President Washington, take hold of this court case in the public conversation?
I think that we shouldn't assume or take for granted our democracy, our republic, and we should not suggest that it's resilient. We can say that it's held, but we're still waiting for accountability. And I think something that's really important about the presidency, a fair amount of distrust was established after President Ford pardoned Nixon, and he did so explicitly because Nixon was going to be held accountable for crimes against the United States. So what we should be focusing on here is not whether justice should be applied, but why it shouldn't be. That we need there to be a rule of law in order for our democracy to continue to exist and thrive and aspire towards a better country. That is what the founders wanted for us, to make our country better with every generation. And that means making sure to respond to any threats, whether they be inside the United States or outside of it.
Alexis Coe, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.